instaurés pour la vie, et qui en sont arrivés à un niveau de désespérance, sont en train de sortir de cette résignation et de cette désespérance. Vous avez remarqué comme moi que Khamenei avait applaudi et encouragé les Arabes dans les rues du Caire, de Benghazi ou de Tunis. Et c'était très choquant de voir cet homme encourager aussi cyniquement et hypocritement le soulèvement dans la rue, alors que dans son propre pays, il a instauré des lois qui condamnent à l'exécution capitale toute manifestation contre le pouvoir. Les retombées de toutes sortes de ces mouvements dans les pays arabes ne manqueront pas, croyez-moi, de mettre en valeur le cas iranien sur lequel on s'est beaucoup trop tu dans le monde occidental. On s'est tu dans une sorte de conspiration du silence sur les 120 000 exécutions qui ont été effectuées pendant 30 ans par l'imam Khomeini et l'imam Khamenei contre les opposants. On s'est trop longtemps tu sur les 30 000 exécutions exécutées pendant 3 mois seulement, en moins de 3 mois, en l'année 1988, quand Khomeini a inventé le concept de Muharab, c'est-à-dire l'ennemi de Dieu, et a considéré que la loi iranienne allait désormais considérer tout opposant au régime comme un ennemi de Dieu et qui est passible de la seule sanction qui est l'exécution capitale. Donc la centralité du problème iranien va être mise en valeur, car ce qui va se passer en Iran ne peut pas ne pas se répercuter positivement ou négativement sur l'ensemble de la sphère musulmane. Ironiquement, il y en a eu du sort, car la stratégie du régime iranien a été sans cesse d'étendre son influence à l'ensemble de la sphère arabo-musulmane et d'effectuer cette influence par l'intermédiaire du développement de sa capacité de nuire. Je remercie le comité de défense suisse pour son travail, qui n'est pas seulement un travail des droits de l'homme, et déjà c'est considérable de s'occuper des droits de l'homme, ça honore le comité, ça honore ses membres et ça honore la Suisse. Et c'est un sujet qui concerne l'humanité entière. Je vous remercie.
But it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to see Howard Dean here. Indeed, it's a pleasure, Governor Dean. And he is, as we say in French, a macher in American politics. He's a very notable presence in the Democratic Party. And I think it's really quite important to take public note of the fact that in the U.S., the fate of Ashraf and the fate of Iran has become a wholly bipartisan issue. The Congress has been as active on the Democratic side as the Republican side. I think these panels reflect the fact that anybody who's committed to human rights, regardless of their electoral ambitions or commitments, has to take the same position. Now, on the issues before us, next July, Iran will come before the United Nations Human Rights Committee. Remarkably enough, they've signed the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as hypocritical as that signature might seem. And at that examination, which is open to the public, which will surely be held in Palais des Nations because of the great interest in Iran, questions I have no doubt will be asked about the gross violations of freedom of expression, the gross violations of the right to be free from torture and mistreatment, the prohibitions on public assembly, the imposition on the rights of women, the interference with the rights of families. One of the most moving experiences that I have had is to meet some of the relatives of people who have lost their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers in Iranian prisons under torture and to death. It's also very ironic that there should be any trouble with Iran, given the central role of Geneva as the home of the Red Cross, the violations of humanitarian law that the Red Crescent has worked to champion are so grossly violated in the treatment of the residents of Camp Ashraf, who have been told by the U.S. military and others that they qualify as protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention to be treated decently, to be protected by the standards of Common Article 3, and yet indeed the restriction of medical care, the kinds of loudspeakers that prevent any decent sleep, the prohibition on exit or entrance, the inability to visit family are all inconsistent with the guarantees of the Fourth Geneva Convention protecting the rights of civilians. If I had any suggestions, it would be in part to make the movement even broader, to reach out and try to elicit a statement from Ban Ki-moon, from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, from the Islamic Conference, from the Arab League, from ASEAN, from the Group of 77, from the non-aligned movement. This ought not to be just a North American, European, and Persian issue. It should be a global issue. And every regional group, I think, should be called upon to state its proper views on this in the Human Rights Council and elsewhere. And I certainly hope this will come to the forefront of American policy. It's thrilling to watch the popular person in the street create this revolution in North Africa that no one foresaw. And it would be the height of irony if Iran was left behind. If there's any sense of destiny, of catching the tide as the ocean flows, this is the moment when Iran should become free. And although President Obama has sometimes been cautious out of his own perception of the heavy hand of America in the past in the Third World, nonetheless, I think this is one instance in which his former competitor for the presidency, Hillary Clinton, will give him good counsel that indeed, if the U.S. is silent in a situation such as this, it would be utterly inconsistent with our own revolutionary past. So I trust that President Obama will also speak out with the clarity and volume that the situation calls for. And finally, let me just note for those of us who are realpolitik, if you will, I very much in this situation agree with the views of John Bolton, who probably Governor Dean doesn't often agree with, but he might agree with him here, as I do, which is that the future of Iran is utterly at the center of the safety of the West and the East. Iran's current regime is pernicious in its cooperation with North Korea. It's pernicious in its cooperation with other states that are, if you will, sustaining and championing nuclear proliferation. You will not have peace in the Middle East until the Iranian role in supporting Hezbollah and Hamas is re-examined. So from the point of view of the most hard-headed, even so, if you were Henry Kissinger, one's view ought to be that the change of regime in Iran is central to reestablishing stability in the Middle East and preventing the kind of spiraling nuclear proliferation that has now become so dangerous. I would just put three questions. I'm just throwing them out there. Question one, should the U.S. in fact withdraw all its troops from Iraq as long as Ashraf is under threat? Secondly, should the oil companies do business in Iraq so long as Ashraf citizens are mistreated? We discovered that in regard to Iran, that oil sanctions are quite effective. Oil companies have headquarters. They have chief executive officers. They are indeed somewhat sensitive to public opinion. And one could query whether indeed one should do business in Iraq so long as the regime is mistreating Ashraf. I'm not advocating anything, but I'm saying it's a question that each person here could examine and look at the effective means of change. And third, should oil companies do business in Iran so long as the Iranian regime continues to oppress its people and develop nuclear weapons? There has been a movement